Book 3, Part 1 of The Art of War by Machiavelli, translated by Henry Neville. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Clive Catterall. Book 3, Part 1. Cosimo said, "Since we are changing the discussion, I would like the questioner to be changed, so that I may not be held to be presumptuous, which I have always censured in others. I therefore resign the speakership, and I surrender it to any of these friends of mine who want it." Zenobi said, "It would be most gracious of you to continue, but since you do not want to, you ought at least to tell us which of us should succeed in your place." Cosimo said, "I would like to pass this burden on to the Lord Fabrizio." Fabrizio said, "I am content to accept it, and would like to follow the Venetian custom, that the youngest talks first. For this being an exercise for young men, I am persuaded that young men are more adept at reasoning than they are quick to follow." Cosimo said, "It falls therefore to you, Luigi, and I am pleased with such a successor, as long as you are satisfied with such a questioner." Fabrizio said, "I am certain that in wanting to show how an army is well organized for undertaking an engagement, it would be necessary to narrate how the Greeks and the Romans arranged the ranks in their armies. Nonetheless, as you yourselves are able to read and consider these things through the medium of ancient writers, I shall omit many particulars, and will cite only those things that appear necessary for me to imitate in the desire, in our times, to give some part of perfection to our army. This will be done, and in time I will show how an army is arranged for an engagement, how it faces a real battle, and how it can be trained in mock ones. The greatest mistake that those men make who arrange an army for an engagement is to give it only one front, and commit it to only one onrush and one attempt or fortune. This results from having lost the method the ancients employed of receiving one rank into the other. For without this method one cannot help the rank in front, or defend them, or change them by rotation in battle, which was practiced best by the Romans. In explaining this method, therefore, I want to tell how the Romans divided each legion into 3 parts, namely the Astati, the Princeps, and the Triarii, of whom the Astati were placed in the first line of the army in solid and deep ranks, and behind them were the Princeps, but placed with their ranks more open, and behind these they placed the Triarii, with ranks so sparse as to be able, if necessary, to receive the Princeps and the Astati between them. In addition to these they had slingers, bowmen, archers, and other lightly armed, who were not in these ranks but were situated at the head of the army, between the cavalry and the infantry. These light-armed men, therefore, enkindled the battle, and if they won, which rarely happened, they pursued the victory. If they were repulsed, they retired by way of the flanks of the army, or into the intervals and gaps provided for such a result, and were led back among those who were not armed. After this proceeding, the Astati came hand to hand with the enemy, and who, if they saw themselves being overcome, retired little by little through the open spaces in the ranks of the Princeps, and together with them renewed the fight. If these also were forced back, they all retired into the thin lines of the Triarii, and all together, en masse, recommenced the battle. And if these were defeated, there was no other remedy, as there was no way left to reform themselves. The cavalry were on the flanks of the army, placed like 2 wings on a body, and they sometimes fought on horseback and sometimes helped the infantry, according as the need required. This method of reforming themselves 3 times is almost impossible to surpass, as it is necessary that fortune abandon you 3 times, and that the enemy has so much virtue that he overcomes you 3 times. The Greeks, with their phalanxes, did not have this method of reforming themselves, and although these had many ranks and leaders within them, nonetheless they constituted one body, or rather one front, so that in order to help one another they did not retire from one rank into the other, as the Romans, but one man took the place of another, which they did in this way. Their phalanxes were made up of ranks, and supposing they had placed 50 men per rank, when their front came up against the enemy, only the first 6 ranks of all of them were able to fight, because their lances, which they called sarisi, were so long that the point of the lances of those in the 6th rank reached past the front rank. When they fought, therefore, if any of the first rank fell, either killed or wounded, whoever was behind him in the 2nd rank immediately entered into his place, and whoever was behind him in the 3rd rank immediately entered into the place of the 2nd rank, which became vacant. And thus successively all at once the ranks behind restored the deficiencies of those in front, so that the ranks were always remained complete, and no position of the combatants was vacant except in the last rank, which became depleted because there was no one in its rear to restore it, so that the injuries which the first rank suffered depleted the last, and the first rank always remained complete. And thus the phalanxes, because of this arrangement, were able rather to become depleted than broken, since the large size of its body made it more immobile. The Romans, in the beginning, also employed phalanxes, and it struck their legions in a way similar to theirs. Afterwards they were not satisfied with this arrangement, and divided the legion into several bodies, that is, into cohorts and maniples. For they judged, as was said a little while ago, that that body should have more life in it, be more active, which should have more spirit, and that it should be composed of several parts, and each regulate itself. The battalions of the Swiss, in these times, employed all the methods of the phalanxes, as much in the size and entirety of their organization, as in the method of helping one another. And when coming to an engagement, they placed the battalions one on the flank of the other, or they placed them one behind the other. They have no way in which the first rank, if it should retire, to be received by the second, but with this arrangement, in order to help one another, they place one battalion in front and another behind it, to the right, so that if the first has need of aid, the latter can go forward and succour it. They put a 3rd battalion behind these, but distant a gunshot. This they do because if the other 2 are repulsed, this 3rd one can make its way forward, and the others have room in which to retire, and avoid the onrush of the one which is going forward. For a large multitude cannot be received in the same way as a small body, and therefore the small and separate bodies that existed in a Roman legion could be so placed together as to be able to receive one another among themselves, and help each other easily. And that this arrangement of the Swiss is not as good as that of the ancient Romans is demonstrated by the many examples of the Roman legions when they engaged in battle with the Greek phalanxes, and the latter were always destroyed by the former, because the kinds of arms, as I mentioned before, and this method of reforming themselves was not able to maintain the solidity of the phalanx. With these examples, therefore, if I had to organize an army, I would prefer to retain the arms and the methods partly of the Greek phalanxes, partly of the Roman legions. And therefore I have mentioned wanting in a battalion 2,000 pikes, which are the arms of the Macedonian phalanxes, and 3,000 swords and shield, which are the arms of the Romans. I have divided the battalion into 10 companies, as the Romans divided the legion into 10 cohorts. I have organized the veliti, that is, the light-armed, to enkindle the battle, as they, the Romans, did. And thus, as the arms are mixed, being shared by both nations, and as also the organizations are shared, I have arranged that each company have 5 ranks of pikes in front, and the remainder swordsmen with shields, in order to be able with this front to resist the cavalry and easily penetrate the enemy companies on foot, and the enemy at first encounter would meet the pikes, which I would hope would suffice to resist him, and then the swordsman would defeat him. And if you would note the virtue of this arrangement, you will see all these arms will execute their office completely. First, because pikes are useful against cavalry, and when they come against infantry, they do their duty well before the battle closes in, for when they are pressed, they become useless. Whence the Swiss, to avoid this disadvantage, after every 3 ranks of pikemen, place one of halberds, which, while it is not enough, gives the pikemen room to manoeuvre. Placing, therefore, our pikes in the front, and the shields and swordsmen behind, they managed to resist the cavalry and, in enkindling the battle, lay open and attack the infantry. But when the battle closes in and they become useless, the shields and swords take their place, who are able to take care of themselves in every strait. Luigi said, "We now await with desire to learn how you would arrange an army for battle with these arms and with these organizations." Fabrizio said, "I do not want to show you anything else other than this. You have to understand that in a regular Roman army, which they called a consular army, there were not more than 2 legions of Roman citizens, which consist of 600 cavalrymen, about 11,000 infantry. They also had as many more infantry and cavalry, which were sent to them by their friends and confederates, which they divided into 2 parts, and they called one the right wing, and the other the left wing. And they never permitted these latter infantry to exceed the number of infantry of the legion. They were well content that the cavalry should be greater in number. With this army, which consisted of 22,000 infantry and about 2,000 cavalry effectives, a consul undertook every action and went on every enterprise. And when it was necessary to face a large force, they brought together 2 consuls with 2 armies. You ought also to note that ordinarily in all 3 of the principal activities in which armies engage, that is, marching, camping and fighting, they placed the legion in the middle, because they wanted that virtue in which they should trust most should be a greater unity, as the discussion of all these activities will show you. Those auxiliary infantry, because of the training they had with the infantry of the legion, were as effective as the latter, as they were disciplined as they were, and therefore they arranged them in a similar way when organizing for an engagement. Whoever, therefore, knows how they deployed the entire army. Therefore, having told you how they divided a legion into 3 lines, and how one line would receive the others, I have come to tell you how the entire army was organized for an engagement. If I would want, therefore, to arrange an army for an engagement in imitation of the Romans, just as they had 2 legions, I would take 2 battalions. And these having been deployed, the disposition of an entire army would be known. For by adding more people, nothing else is accomplished than to enlarge the organization. I do not believe it is necessary that I remind you how many infantry there are in a battalion, and that it has 10 companies, and what leaders there are per company, and what arms they have, and who are the ordinary or regular pikemen and veliti, and who the extraordinary, because a little while ago I distinctly told you, and I reminded you to commit it to memory as something necessary if you want to understand all the other arrangements. And therefore I will come to the demonstration of the arrangement, without repeating these again. And it appears to me that 10 companies of a battalion should be placed on the left flank, and the 10 others on the right. Those on the left should be arranged in this way. The 5 companies should be placed one alongside the other on the front, so that between one and the next there should be a space of 4 arm lengths, which come to occupy an area of 140 arm lengths long and 40 wide. Behind these 5 companies I would place 3 others, distant in a straight line from the first ones by 40 arm lengths, 2 of which should come behind in a straight line at the ends of the 5, and the other should occupy the space in the middle. Thus these 3 would come to occupy in length and width the same space as the 5, but where the 5 would have a distance of 4 arm lengths between one another, this one would have 33. Behind these I would place the last 2 companies, also in a straight line behind the 3, and distant from those 3 40 arm lengths, and I would place each of them behind the ends of the 3, so that the space between them would be 91 arm lengths. All of these companies arranged thusly would therefore cover an area of 141 arm lengths long and 200 wide. The extraordinary pikemen I would extend along the flanks of these companies on the left side, distant 20 arm lengths from it, creating 143 files of 7 per file, so that they should cover the entire length of the 10 companies arranged as I have previously described. and there would remain 40 files for protecting the wagons and the unarmed people in the tail of the army, and assigning the heads of 10 and the centurions in their proper places. And of the 3 constables, I would put one at the head, another in the middle, and the third in the last file, who should fill the office of tergidatori, as the ancients called the one placed in the charge of the rear of the army. But returning to the head or van of the army, I say that I would place the extraordinary veliti alongside the extraordinary pikemen, which, as you know, are 500, and would place them at a distance of 40 arm lengths. On the side of these, also on the left hand, I would place the men-at-arms, and would assign them a distance of 150 arm lengths away. Behind these, the light cavalry, to whom I would assign the same space as the men-at-arms. The ordinary veliti I would leave around their companies, who would occupy those spaces which I placed between one company and another, and would act to minister to those companies, unless I had already placed them under the extraordinary pikemen, which I would do or not do according as it should benefit my plans. The general head of all the battalions I would place in that space that exists between the first and second order of companies, or rather at the head, and in that space which exists between the last of the first 5 companies and the extraordinary pikemen, according as it should benefit my plans, surrounded by 30 or 60 picked men, and who should know how to execute a commission prudently and stalwartly resist an attack, and should also be in the middle of the buglers and flag carriers. This is the order in which I would deploy a battalion on the left side, which would be the deployment of half the army, and would cover an area 511 arm lengths long, and as much as mentioned above in width, not including the space which that part of the extraordinary pikemen should occupy, who act as a shield for the unarmed men, which would be about 100 arm lengths. The other battalions I would deploy on the right side, exactly in the same way as I deployed those on the left, having a space of 30 arm lengths between one battalion and the other, in the head of which space I would place some artillery pieces, behind which would be the Captain General of the entire army, who should have around him, in addition to the buglers and flag carriers, at least 200 picked men, the greater portion on foot, among whom should be 10 or more adept at executing every command, and should be so provided with arms and a horse as to be able to go on horseback or afoot as the need requires. 10 cannon of the artillery of the army suffice for the reduction of towns, which should not exceed 50 pounds per charge, of which in the field I would employ more in the defence of the encampment than in waging a battle, and the other artillery should all be rather often than 15 pounds of charge. This I would place in front of the entire army, unless the country should be such that I could situate it on the flank in a safe place, where it should not be able to be attacked by the enemy. This formation of the army, thusly arranged, in combat can maintain the order both of the phalanxes and of the Roman legions, because the pikemen are in front and all the infantry so arranged in ranks that, coming to battle with the enemy and resisting him, they should be able to reform the first ranks from those behind, according to the usage of the phalanxes. On the other hand, if they are attacked so that they are compelled to break ranks and retire, they can enter into the space of the second company behind them, and uniting with them, and en masse be able to resist the combat of the enemy again. And if this should not be enough, they can in the same way retire a second time, and combat a third time, so that in this arrangement, as to combating, they can reform according to both the Greek method and the Roman. As to the strength of the army, it cannot be arranged any stronger, for both wings are amply provided with both leaders and arms, and no part is left weak, except that part behind which is unarmed, and even that part has its flanks protected by the extraordinary pikemen. Nor can the enemy assault it in any part where he will not find them organized, and the part in the back cannot be assaulted because there cannot be an enemy who has so much power that he can assail every side equally. For if there is one, you don't have to take the field with him. But if he should be a third greater than you, and as well organized as you, if he weakens himself by assaulting you in several places, as soon as you defeat one part, all will go badly for him. If his cavalry should be greater than yours, be most assured, for the ranks of pikemen that gird you will defend you from every onrush of theirs, even if your cavalry should be repulsed. In addition to this, the heads are placed on the side so that they are able easily to command and obey. And the spaces that exist between one company and the next one, and between one rank and the next, not only serve to enable one to receive the other, but also to provide a place for the messengers who go and come by order of the captain. And as I told you before, as the Romans had about 20,000 men in an army, so too ought this one have. And as other soldiers borrowed their mode of fighting and the formation of their army from the legions, so too those soldiers that you assembled into your 2 battalions would have to borrow their formations and organization. Having given example of these things, it is an easy matter to imitate it, for if the army is increased either by 2 battalions, or by as many men as are contained in them, nothing else has to be done than to double the arrangements. And where 10 companies are placed on the left side, 20 are now placed, either by increasing or extending the ranks, according as the place or the enemy should command you. Luigi said, "Truly, my lord, I have so imagined this army that I see it now, and have a desire to see it facing us. And not for anything in the world would I desire you to become Fabius Maximus, having thoughts of holding the enemy at bay and delaying the engagement. For I would say worse of you than the Roman people said of him." Fabrizio said, "Do not be apprehensive. Do you not hear the artillery? Ours has already fired, but harmed the enemy little. And the extraordinary veliti come forth from their places, together with the light cavalry, and spread out, and with as much fury and the loudest shouts of which they are capable, assault the enemy, whose artillery has fired one time, and has passed over the heads of our infantry without doing them any injury. And as it is not able to fire a second time, our veliti and cavalry has already seized it, and to defend it the enemy has moved forward, so that neither that of friend or enemy can perform its office. You see with what virtue our men fight, and with what discipline they have become accustomed because of the training they have had, and from the confidence they have in the army, which you see with their stride. And with the men-at-arms alongside, in marching order, going to rekindle the battle with the adversary. You see our artillery, which, to make place for them and to leave the space free, has retired to the place from which the veliti went forth. You see the captain, who encourages them and points out to them certain victory. You see the veliti and light cavalry have spread out and returned to the flanks of the army, in order to see if they can cause any injury to the enemy on the flanks. Look, the armies are facing each other. Watch with what virtue they have withstood the onrush of the enemy, and with what silence, and how the captain commands the men-at-arms that they should resist and not attack, and do not detach themselves from the ranks of the infantry. You see how our light cavalry has gone to attack a band of enemy gunners who wanted to attack by the flank, and how the enemy cavalry have succoured them, so that, caught between the cavalry of the one and the other, they cannot fire, and retire behind their companies. You see with what fury our pikemen attack them, and how the infantry is already so near each other that they can no longer manage their pikes, so that according to the discipline taught by us, our pikemen retire little by little among the shields. Watch how, in this encounter, so great an enemy band of men-at-arms has pushed back our men-at-arms on the left side, and how ours, according to discipline, have retired under the extraordinary pikemen, and having reformed the front with their aid, have repulsed the adversary, and killed a good part of them. In fact, all the ordinary pikemen of the first company have hidden themselves among the ranks of the shields, and having left the battle to the swordsmen, who, look with what virtue, security, and leisure, kill the enemy. Do you not see that, when fighting, the ranks are so straightened that they can handle the swords only with much effort? Look with what hurry the enemy moves, for armed with the pike and their swords useless, the one because it is too long, the other because of finding the enemy too greatly armed, in part they fall dead or wounded, in part they flee. See them flee on the right side, they also flee on the left. Look, the victory is ours. Have we not won an engagement very happily? But it would have been won with greater felicity if I should have been allowed to put them in action. and see that it was not necessary to avail ourselves of either the second or third ranks, that our first line was sufficient to overcome them. In this part I have nothing else to tell you, except to dissolve any doubt that should arise in you." Luigi said, "You have won this engagement with so much fury that I am astonished, and in fact so stupefied that I do not believe I can well explain if there is any doubt left in my mind. Yet, trusting in your prudence, I will take courage to say that I intend. Tell me first, why did you not let your artillery fire more than one time? And why did you have them quickly retire within the army, not afterward make any other mention of them? It seems to me also that you pointed the enemy artillery high, and arranged it so that it should be of much benefit to you. Yet if it should occur, and I believe it happens often, that the lines are pierced, what remedy do you provide? And since I have commenced on artillery, I want to bring up all these questions so as not to have to discuss it any more. I have heard many disparage the arms and the organization of the ancient armies, arguing that today they could do little, or rather how useless they would be against the fury of artillery, for these are superior to their arms and break the ranks, so that it appears to them to be madness to create an arrangement that cannot be held, and to endure hardship in carrying a weapon that cannot defend you. Fabrizio said, "This question of yours has need, because it has so many items, of a long answer. It is true that I did not have the artillery fire more than one time, and because of it one remains in doubt. The reason is that it is more important to one to guard against being shot than shooting the enemy. You must understand that if you do not want the artillery to injure you, it is necessary to stay where it cannot reach you, or to put yourself behind a wall or embankment. Nothing else will stop it, but it is necessary for them to be very strong. Those captains who must make an engagement cannot remain behind walls or embankments, nor can they remain where it may reach them. They must, therefore, since they do not have a way of protecting themselves, find one by which they are injured less. Nor can they do anything other than to undertake it quickly. The way of doing this is to find it quickly and directly, not slowly or en masse, for speed does not allow them to shoot again, and because the men are scattered, they can injure only a few of them. A band of organized men cannot do this, because if they march in a straight line, they become disorganized. And if they scatter, they do not give the enemy the hard work to rout them, for they have routed themselves. And therefore I would organize the army so that it should be able to do both. For having placed 1,000 veliti in its wings, I would arrange that, after our artillery has fired, they should issue forth together with the light cavalry to seize the enemy artillery. And therefore I did not have my artillery fire again, so as not to give the enemy time, for you cannot give me time and take it from others. And for that, the reason I did not have it fire a second time was not to allow it to be fired first, because to render the enemy artillery useless, there is no other remedy than to assault it, which, if the enemy abandons it, you seize it. If they want to defend it, it is necessary that they leave it behind, so that in the hands of the enemy or of friends it cannot be fired. I believe that, even without examples, this discussion should be enough for you. Yet, being able to give you some from the ancients, I will do so. End of Book 3, Part 1.